Great, thank you so much. Welcome everyone to this ArchivesSpace community training on accessions and assessments. I'm Rachel Searcy, and I'm the accessioning archivist at New York University. In advance of this training, you received an email with an agenda for the training and links to all of the materials you will need to participate in this workshop and continue learning after the training is over. I'm also going to drop a link in the chat right now to that link, so that if you're not able to access that email, you'll find the link at the end of your agenda. We may not stick exactly to the time in the agenda, but we will take the planned break. We are using Zoom webinar for this training, and your microphone and camera are both muted. If you'd like to ask questions, we do ask that you please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. That helps us sort of look at them all together. If you have a general question or need some form of assistance, please feel free to reach out in the chat. Some questions will be read and answered during the allocated time for Q&A, but we may also answer some questions by typing directly in the Q&A. So be sure to refer to that because there may be some additional information for you there. We are using the latest version of ArchivesSpace for this training, which is version 3.4.0. If you're using an earlier version of ArchivesSpace at your organization, keep in mind that some of the features you see today may not be available to you at home. We won't be able to troubleshoot issues with your own implementation of ArchivesSpace at your organization, but if you're having troubles with your implementation, please feel free to email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. And finally, please keep in mind that there are many participants in this workshop from a variety of institutions with varied experience levels. Remember that the ArchivesSpace Code of Conduct applies to all ArchivesSpace events, including this one. Please remember to be considerate and respectful in your interactions with fellow participants, Malaka, and myself in the Q&A and chat. So this training, like I said before, is going to provide an introduction to the accessions and assessments modules, and we look forward to talking with you today about them. Before I dive into the training, I want to mention that the examples we are using today are real collections held by ArchivesSpace member organizations. These organizations have made their metadata available to the program for the purposes of education and training, and in the interest of creating a more diverse set of example data. We're very grateful for that. And now I would also just like to introduce myself a little more fully. Like I said before, my name is Rachel Searcy, and I've been involved in ArchivesSpace for about 8 years now. At NYU, I worked on our migration to ArchivesSpace from Archivist Toolkit, and I act as our primary administrator. I've also been part of the ArchivesSpace Advisory Council for the past few years, and I'm currently the chair of the Technical Advisory Council. I've been working in academic archives for the past 12 years, so many of my references and examples are going to be informed by that perspective. If I say something that doesn't match your process, please feel free to ask for clarity. We know that there are many different processes, workflows, and use cases in archives, and that is true for ArchivesSpace as well. I will also mention here that relevant to this training particularly, that I'm a member of a working group sanctioned by the SAA Standards Committee to develop best practices for accessioning work. So I might talk a little bit about that at the end of the accessioning section. So, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and move directly into the training. I'm going to minimize my chat and Q&A, so Malaka, please feel free to chime in if there's anything you want to alert me about. So I'm going to share my screen and get us going. Okay. So accession records are one of the 3 primary record types in ArchivesSpace, alongside resource records and digital object records. Collectively, we call these material description records, as they are records that describe your collection materials. Accession records are used to document what you know about materials that come into your custody. So this could be a new collection, or it could be an accretion to a collection that you've had for decades. It could be a single item, like a scrapbook, for example, or it could be hundreds of boxes. Alongside collection files, accession records are often the first or one of the first steps in recording information about your collection. So I will be showing you how to create them, how to edit them, and some other functionality for this record type that can hopefully make your life a little easier. So there are multiple ways to create an accession record. The first is if you are browsing all of your accession records, and I'm here in this browse accessions, you can see that up in this menu bar, there is a button that says create accession. So you can use that to create a new accession record. But perhaps maybe the more intuitive way would be to go to this create button and go to create accession. And this will open up a blank template to create an accession record. So here is our blank accession record. Might make this slightly bigger. It has many fields and it might seem a bit overwhelming, but you don't have to put information in each field. In fact, accession records require very little from a system point of view. Currently, there is no descriptive standard in the United States to guide the creation or management of accession records. But like I mentioned when I introduced myself, there is a group working on that. So for now, at least, to save an accession record, all you need is an identifier. And the identifier field has a red asterisk near it, which lets you know that this is required in order for you to save the record. So I'm going to put an identifier in here. You will notice that as I start typing information into one box, the box following becomes available in that it is white and not grayed out. So you do not have to use all 4 of these boxes, nor do you have to use any specific format or standard for your identifier. You could put all of the information in the first box and that would be fine. ArchivesSpace is really agnostic about that. Just make sure that you are being consistent in the way that you apply identifiers across the board. Follow your own internal practices and strive for consistency above all. And that's sort of my major takeaway for the entirety of the accession record portion. ArchivesSpace does require unique identifiers for each accession, individual accession record. So for example, here I have created 2023 199. If I tried to create another accession record and apply that same identifier to it, I would receive an error. If you are at an institution with multiple repositories within a single ArchivesSpace instance, know that accession identifiers must be unique to the repository, but not necessarily the instance. So for example, there can only be one accession record with the identifier 2023 199 in this particular repository. But if I move to this other repository, the RC repository, I could create an accession record that has the same identifier. I hope that is not too confusing. So this is all I need to save the record from a systems point of view. So I'm going to try and save that. And I was successful. I got a green message saying that my record was created. So let's see, if I had either not supplied an identifier, or like I said, if I had tried to repeat an identifier, I would have gotten a red error message. So obviously you're probably going to want to include more information than this. You probably want a title and a date, but that is largely going to be up to you. And we'll get to what else you might want to add in a moment. But let's just pause here for a second before we move into the accession record itself to review the toolbar available when you view or edit an accession record. So actually right now I have it open in edit mode. You can see that because, excuse me, The fields are open and editable, and also you can see right here that it says edit. I can add an event. So an event record is a record that describes an action taken on materials. And in the context of an accession record, you might choose to use this record type to document when a deed of gift was signed, for example, or when an acknowledgement letter was sent to a donor. These are completely optional, and it's up to you to decide if or how they might fit into your workflows. But that is how you would add them to an accession record. I'm just going to hit cancel. We're going to skip this spawn button in a moment, but we will come back to it because it has a lot of really interesting and helpful functionality. Transfer. So if you are, like I mentioned before, if you have multiple repositories within your ArchivesSpace instance, you can use this to transfer your accession record from one repository to another. And then under this More button, we have options to calculate extent. So this functionality relies on adding instances to your accession record, and that those instances have container profiles. But if that's something that you do, this is functionality you might use to calculate the extent for you. And then you can create an assessment record, which is something that Malaka will talk about a little bit later. And then you also have the option to suppress your record. So suppressed records are records in your application that are only visible to certain users who have the permission to see them. And then you also can delete your record. So what I'd like to actually do instead of building out an accession record in real time is move to one that has a lot of information in it, because I think that actually might be more meaningful in showing you the different options available to you. So I'm going to do that now. So we are going to look to this accession record for the Tomi Arai and Li and Wang papers. And again, I'm going to open it up and edit because when you're in view mode, you only see the fields that have content, but I also want to show you all the fields and all the subrecords available to you. Okay, so we're basically just going to kind of walk through it and talk about how or if you might want to use these different parts of the record. So you can see that we have an identifier and that we have a lot of information here. We have an accession date for when these materials were accessioned. And we also see that the publish checkbox is not checked. So this refers to whether or not the record can be viewed in the public user interface. So first of all, to back up, the public user interface is part of the ArchivesSpace application that serves as a front end to allow users to discover and potentially request your materials. It's completely optional to use. And so the publish checkbox indicates whether this record is potentially viewable on that side of things. So again, if you use that, and if you do want people to be able to see your accession records, not everyone does, you would potentially want to check that checkbox. And that's true for all record types, is that publish checkbox. There are ways to set your preferences so that newly created records automatically are set to publish. Some other basic information you might want to include in an accession record includes, well, a title, and then a content description. So I'm just going to expand this a little bit because it's a little bit lengthy. The content description is a summary of your collection materials, and at least at my institution, we basically use it interchangeably or as sort of a proto scope and content note. So you can see here that this institution has a paragraph that basically does exactly what a scope and content note does. You might want to use the condition description field to indicate, it could be anything. It could be kind of an overall observations. It could be to identify specific issues and sort of actions needing that you want to take on them. So like I said before, this record has a lot of information in it, and there are a lot of fields in the accession record that you can use. And so just kind of keep in mind that a lot of this is information that you can potentially repurpose down the line in other forms. So we are going to go just through what else is in this basic information section. Disposition is a place to record basically what happens to this material. So in this case, we see that a new collection was created, but also that part of what they received were separated and sent elsewhere. So these were published books that were sent to a used bookstore. It's really helpful to record any interventions or things that you do to the collection. You never know when you're going to need that or who else might need that information. You're not always going to remember it or be the person fielding a question about it. There's an inventory field, which people use differently. You could use the field to record sort of the presence of an inventory, maybe one that the donor gave you upon acquisition, and say where that is located. Or I know other folks use this field to create kind of a really basic inventory. That's really up to you to decide if or how you want to use this field. The provenance field is relatively straightforward: who gave it to you and when. Retention rule field, this is not being used in this particular record, but if there is some sort of policy or maybe like a records retention schedule that governs why or how a particular group of materials is being retained, you might want to include that here. There is a catch-all general note field. If you find that you have information you want to record that doesn't have any other home, you could potentially use that field. And then we have a few sort of controlled value options of the acquisition type. So this was a gift, but you could also indicate whether something is a purchase or a transfer or the dreaded deposit option, and this list is configurable. You can add or remove options. As you can see, there's some duplication here. You could indicate the resource type if you wanted to say something is papers as opposed to records, as opposed to a collection. You can also indicate the language and the script of the description. So not the language and script of the materials themselves, but the language that you are using when you're creating this accession record. So this is set to English and Latin script. We also have options to indicate if there are any access restrictions on the materials, as well as the intellectual property status of the collection. And there's a combination of checkboxes and free text fields. So you can kind of identify how you want to use these based on what you're using. Like if you use the public user interface, for example, you might want to employ these checkboxes. If you don't, you may not. So, food for thought. So that is the basic information field. These are specific to accession records. So you are not going to see these fields or exactly these fields in other record types. However, you will see what we're going to talk about next, the subrecords. Those are going to look perhaps familiar if you've maybe spent more time with resource records and digital object records. So those are going to look kind of the same as applied to different record types. So we're going to kind of go through some, maybe not all of the subrecords, but see how you could use them. So let's see. So yeah, we have we have a language subrecord, which again, none of these subrecords are required, but they can add a lot of really helpful information to your accession record, especially since accessioning is sort of one of the first times you're really thinking about a collection and have a lot of information about it. So it's a good time to document that information. Let's maybe go down to the date subrecord. So the date subrecord is repeatable, and you can see here that this institution has applied 2 date records, one for a kind of a larger inclusive date range and one for a bulk date range span. We also have, again, multiple extent statements. This one is for the entirety of the accession, where we can see that it's 35 linear feet, and they also included a container summary. And then we have what we call part extent statements. So an extent statement that only refers to a small, or maybe not small, a portion of your accession in a more specific way. So we can see here that these folks created separate extent statements for digital content and for different audiovisual formats. Again, this is not required by the system, but it can be really helpful, especially down the line, to sort of have a more specific picture of what is in your materials. It can be really helpful in thinking about, future processing, for example, and planning ahead. I know personally, I have definitely come across collections where, oh, it's 5 linear feet, that won't take long. And I open up the box and there's, 4 hard drives, and that really changes, the amount of time I'm going to spend on the collection. And so it can be really helpful to either yourself, your future self, or your colleagues to provide that level of information when you're aware of it. Excuse me. You also have the ability to associate agent records and subject records with the accession record. If and how you use this is up to you, but for agents, you have 3 options when linking an agent to an accession record. You can designate their role as either being the creator, the source, or the subject. So in this example, they have done all 3, where we have 2 creators, and we have a source, the donor, and we also have a few different agent, it looks like they're mostly corporate bodies who are indicated to be subjects of this accession. So they didn't create it, they didn't give it to us, but they are prominently documented in it, and they wanted to make that known. Scroll down further. Oh, there's quite a bit of agents. I'm gonna skip some of these for just a moment and just talk about subjects. So you can link subject records to your accession record. If the subject record already exists in your ArchivesSpace instance, you can, so to add a subject, you can either click the plus button or do add subject. If it's already in your database, you can either type ahead or you can browse for that subject record. If it's not yet in your system, you can click this downward arrow and create your new subject record, and it will then both create your new subject and also link it to your accession record. But I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to hit X and confirm removal. In addition to agents and subjects, you can also you can link your accession record to a resource record, but only if that resource record already exists. So you might want to use this if you're working on an accretion to an existing collection. We'll talk in a moment about what you might want to do when accessioning a new collection that does not yet have a resource record. So we can see here, when we look at this linked related resource record, that it's dark blue, as are our linked agent and subject records. So a blue record like that just means that it's its own record, a record unto itself. So I could, click on it and open it up. And let's see, component links. This links an accession record to a specific archival object. So for example, like a series. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later when we talk about spawning, where you can see why that might actually be relevant and potentially useful. You can also link one accession record to another, and that's what's meant right here by related accessions. So to use this functionality, you select add related accessions, and then it's going to ask you to indicate the relationship type. And you have basically two options, part of or sibling. So a part of relationship might be used, for example, let's say you have a group of manuscripts that have been purchased at auction in a lot. So you might want to create an accession record for that one purchase. And then you might also want individual accession records for each individual collection purchased in that lot. And so the part of related accession would be used to link that individual collection back to the larger lot purchase. A sibling relationship could be employed if you have a collection with multiple accruals over time. And so you would be creating an accession record for each accrual, and you could link those all those accruals together through this related accessions as the sibling relationship. Once you designate the type of relationship, you'll then find the accession that you want to link to, again, either through type ahead functionality or by browsing. And then again, you would make sure that you select the appropriate term to describe that relationship. I will say this functionality is completely optional. I admittedly don't use it at my home institution, but it might be a perfect match for your particular collections and your workflows. So I want you to be aware of it. Okay, now we are going to scroll down to some of the other subrecords. So external documents, we actually saw a little preview of that in the basic information tab. I'm going to scroll back up. So in this inventory field, someone said, donor supplied inventory located in collection file linked as external document. So I'm going to hop back down to external documents, and the actual link has been removed, but you can hopefully get the gist of what's going on here, which is that this subrecord is being used to provide a link to the collection file where someone could find that inventory or perhaps other curatorial or acquisitions related documentation. So rights statement. So from here on below, we don't actually have this information in the record in front of us, but I'll kind of talk through what they are and how you might use them. So rights statement. This is a subrecord that you can use to record information about the rights status of the material that you're working with. And it allows you to link to one or more external documents. So maybe it would be helpful if I opened it up. So yeah, you can use it to link to an external document, such as a deed of gift, in which copyright has been transferred, or perhaps an institutional policy that you have. It is repeatable, so you could add as many rights statements as necessary to account for the rights status of the materials you have. So you, for example, you might be dealing with both intellectual property laws and institutional policies. We do recommend that if you're using the subrecord, that you also complement it with either an access restriction and or a use restriction note, like a free text that is in the basic information section. Okay. Metadata rights declaration. So to give a little bit of context here, in 2021, DACS is describing Archives of Content Standard, which is the American Archival Content Standard for description, introduced two new required elements, 8.2, a rights statement for archival description, and 13.11, a rights statement for archival authority records. So this introduction actually led to the creation of this subrecord, which was added to the application in version 3.2. Although the descriptive elements are required for DACS compliance, the use of this subrecord in ArchivesSpace is completely optional. And how you use it would be entirely up to you. And I just kind of want to mention that it's not the only way to communicate, to communicate information about the intellectual property status of your archival metadata. So you can use it, but you also do not have to use it. We're going to skip, I'm now going to hop around a little bit more. So collection management. This subrecord is used to add staff-only information about processing materials, and you can only have one collection management record per accession or per resource or per digital object record. There are no required fields, but if you use, but processing total extent and extent type must be used together in order to make it work. So this is another one of those cases of, use it to the extent that it helps in your workflow, but it is not required. Classification. So this subrecord is used for linking an accession record to a classification record. You can link to one or more classification records. And we do have videos about using the classifications module. So if you're interested, you can review those. Deaccessions. This subrecord allows you to record information about materials that may have been separated or appraised out of the collection, whether they were returned to the donor, disposed of, or transferred to another institution. And it could refer to removing just a portion of the accession or the accession in its entirety. Sorry, I should have had that open while I was talking. Whether you apply the subrecord to your accession records or your resource records, that really depends on your local practice. Again, just try and be consistent with what you do and where you do it. Okay, now we're going to hop back up to instances. So an instance in ArchivesSpace refers to the physical or digital instantiation of materials. We don't have time to get into top container functionality in its fullness in this training, but you can absolutely look for videos in the Help Center or the ArchivesSpace YouTube channel to learn more about that. You may or may not decide to include instances in your accession records. Not everybody does. Some people choose to keep them with their resource records only. But it is something that you can do, and I want to make sure that you're aware that you have that ability. So to declare an instance, you want to go to the instance section of the record and go to add container instance. And when you do that, the required fields are type and top container. So I am going to leave it there before we get too deep in the weeds on how top containers work, but just know that that is how you add them to an accession record. Similarly, you can add a digital object or multiple digital object records to an accession record, and you follow the same process. So instances, add digital object, and then again, you can either type ahead, browse, or you can create directly from here. Okay, all the way at the bottom, we have our user-defined fields. I'm going to open that up while I talk about it. So user-defined fields are what we call semantically neutral data fields, and can be used to record additional information that's not supported or available in other sections of the accession record. There are 25 user-defined fields available, covering 7 different data types. So you can kind of see what those look like here. We have some Booleans, integers, dates, text strings, longer text, and controlled values. The purpose of user-defined fields is to give you all an opportunity to describe materials in the manner that you need to, especially if it's not supported elsewhere in the kind of standard archival accession record template. So just as an example, in the accession record, your institution might choose to record information about whether a monetary appraisal was performed, the date of that appraisal, the amount, the name of the appraiser, the appraisal statement. So those are all things that don't have fields elsewhere in the accession record. So you could rename these user-defined fields as like appraised, appraisal date, appraisal amount. Assigning the label to a user-defined field does set the field's semantic value. And so that value applies across your repository. So just to kind of let you know that like that's the same label you would see in any other accession record that you create or open where in your user-defined fields. Editing user-defined fields and their labels must be done by editing the YAML file in which the translation values are encoded. But again, user-defined fields are completely optional, and I would just maybe give a word of caution in using them because they do kind of represent a departure beyond what is in the sort of like core part of the accession record itself. Okay, we are going to go all the way back up to the top to look at something that I mentioned and skipped. So I'm just going to make sure our record is saved. And we're going to talk about spawning. So we saw earlier that we can link an accession record to an existing resource record. But let's say that this was a new collection and the resource record didn't already exist, but we want to have a resource record. And we have so much good information here, and we would really love to build it out, add some more description, but we don't want to start from scratch. And we don't need to redo all that work. So we are in luck, and we're going to use what we call spawning to help us with that. And what this does is it creates a new record, taking pieces of our original accession record, so that we don't have to duplicate our work. And then we can tweak sort of what we're given, but again, like we don't have to start from nothing. This is super useful, and I genuinely use it all the time. So I'm just going to kind of go over what you can do. So you have 3 different options or 3 different records that you can spawn from an accession record. You can create another accession record from this. So this is really useful if you have, for example, a donor that gives you accruals maybe on a kind of standard basis and tends to be a lot of the same kind of material. I'll just show you what that looks like. So I'll go to spawn accession, and it gives me a new accession record that has a lot of my same information, and then I can kind of tweak it. So I would give it a new identifier. I would give it a new date. I'm just making up a date. I could maybe, get rid of this because it doesn't make sense for this new material. I could edit this disposition note to say it's new series, series, series 10 accretion or whatever. And then I would maybe update the date to say that it was donated in, 2023. But all of my other information, the access restrictions are maybe the same. The intellectual property is the same. I might need to change the dates, but again, like I don't have to do it all again. So I find this to be really helpful, especially with accretions to existing collections. I will just say, you can see right up here in the blue, I'll make it a little bit bigger, that we have a message that says, this record is unsaved. You must click save for the record to be created in the system. So this record doesn't exist yet. It's just kind of like the idea of a record at this point. So I'm actually not going to save it because I sort of don't want to create any confusion. So I'm going to actually go all the way down and click cancel. But yeah, you do, when you're spawning, you do have to save the record, like actively save it. But again, I find that so useful. I use it all the time. You can also create a resource record from an accession record. So I'm going to go to spawn resource. And again, we have our same blue message. This record doesn't really exist yet. You have to click save, but let's say this is going to be MSS 999. It's a collection. And I'll just kind of scroll down so that you can see what all has come over. But you can see that the title came over, our language subrecord came over, both of our dates, all of our extents. This section doesn't have anything because this information, doesn't exist in the accession record. But you can see all those agent links came over, the linked subjects came over, and then this is one of my favorite things. 2 of the fields from that basic information part of the accession record came over and they were turned into notes. So our content description field became a scope and contents note, and our condition description field became a physical description note. And I just think that's wonderful. So, and it really kind of allows you to sort of like keep building on your work instead of starting over. So, your content description note may not have been quite as lengthy as the one in this example, but it's really cool that you can kind of carry it over, and then you can always add to it and you can edit it, but you don't have to rewrite it. Again, I'm not going to save this record because there is already a resource record, but it's just such a time saver. And then lastly, you have the ability to spawn an archival object from your accession record. This is actually relatively new functionality. It was introduced in 3.3.1. And I think the easiest way to show you what the utility of this is to kind of do it. But the way I am starting to use this is for accretions to existing collections, where I envision the new accession is kind of going to become its own series in the resource record, and I can kind of create that archival object for the series directly from the accession record, which is really great. So I'm going to demonstrate that now. I'm going to go to spawn archival object. And this one has a few more steps involved because it's basically like you need to find, you kind of have to direct ArchivesSpace where it needs to go. So I want it to go into this Tomi Arai and Ligon Wang papers, the resource record for it. So I'm going to find it and select it. And then it's also asking me, like, where do you want this to go? Like, where should the archival object be? And so it's bringing up the tree for you. So in my example, I want to create a new series. So I want it to be series 5. So this works kind of like the reorder mode if you're working in resource records. So I'm just gonna click on the last item here. And when I click, it's giving me options to say like, where in relation to this do you want it to go? So I can put it before, I can make it a child of this component, or I can put it after. So I want it to go after. So that's what I'm going to select. And so it's giving you a preview of, it's like, oh, okay, you said after. This is after. I could change my mind, or maybe I kind of made a mistake and actually I want it to be nested underneath this series 4. I can, just click on it and it, gives it, it's not done yet. So now I'm going to say insert as a child, and it's, showing me where it's going to go. I'm actually going to put it at the end again, because I think that's so much easier to see. So yeah, we're going to create a new series. So again, you're kind of previewing it to make sure. And once you're sure, you go to select component position, and it's bringing up basically kind of like a blank template record just for your archival object. And so I'm actually going to retitle, it's bringing over the title field, but I'm going to retitle it to say like series 5 new stuff. And I want this to be a series. And it is carrying over, again, like a lot of my accession information. In the Help Center, there is information on like exactly what fields come over and which ones do not. Sorry, I just realized I skipped down really quickly. I can remove things like I don't particularly maybe need a language note at the series level, so I'm just going to remove that. But I do want my dates and I do want my extents. And I'm actually going to get rid of the agents because I have agents at the collection level. And maybe I want to edit this. Maybe I just want to edit this because I, have some changes to make where, I can make changes here. It's editable. I can add a note to maybe say like, an arrangement note to say like this series has not been arranged or something to that effect. And I can do all sorts of things. So once I'm happy with it, again, like all our other spawning examples, this record is unsaved. I have to save it in order for it to be real. So I'm going to click Save Archival Object. And you can see that now I have a new series exactly where I wanted it to be. And it has all my information. And I can still edit it more, but that has created it right for me. So again, super useful, really kind of happy that that new functionality is in there. And I would encourage you all to kind of play around with it and see how you can make your life easier.
Rachel?
Yes.
Could you demonstrate again how you spawn into the archival object and pick where you want your component to go?
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you.
Sure. So I'm going to go back to our accession record in order to do that. So, okay. So here we are in our accession record. We're going to go to spawn archival object. And the first thing we're doing is telling ArchivesSpace which resource record we want the archival object to be a part of. So I find my resource record and go to select resource. And just make this slightly bigger. So once I select my resource, it's bringing up basically the tree of my resource record to ask me where this new component should live. And what I want to do is click on the closest place to where I want it to be, and then I will get options to clarify. So I added a new series last time. If I wanted to add yet another series, like series 6, I would just select this last item in the tree. And once I click on it, it's asking me to be more specific. So like, I could add it as a component before this last item. I could add it as a component after, or I could add that my new spawned component could be nested as a child under the thing I selected. So let's say, for example, that I want this to be another series. So I'm going to select after. And so what it's doing now is basically previewing for me where it's going, where it will be based on what I told it. And I can do this as many times as I need to in order to get it right. So maybe that's actually not what I want. Maybe I want it to be, between 4 and 5. I can just click this again. And those 3 options will come up again. So maybe, yeah, I want it to be in between. So I'll do before. And so it's like, okay, now it's going to be in between there. Or like I said before, maybe I do want it to be a child nested underneath one of these components. I would just select that component and say, insert spawned component as child. So it's like showing me what that might look like. So actually that's what I'm going to do right now. And so I'm going to say select component position. Once I'm happy, then you say select component position. And it brings up sort of a blank record for just your archival object. And here is the point that you can edit what has been carried over so that it's exactly what you want it to be. So maybe this is a sub-series, series 1. Maybe this is correspondence. I'm not sure exactly. And so I set the level that I want it to be, and I just go through what has been carried over to either get rid of stuff I no longer want. So like I said before, I don't really want a language at the sub-series level. But I want, my dates, I want my extents or what have you. And these notes came over, I can edit them as I see fit here. I could also, I could add an instance here if I wanted to, or I could do that later. So once I'm sort of ready to save this record, I want it to exist. I'll just kind of review it and then I'll click save. And then we can now see that it created a new component where we asked it to in the resource record without having to sort of create all that information anew. So it definitely has a few more steps than the other spawning processes, but it is exciting that it is available. I hope that was clear. But if we want to go over it again in the Q&A, we can absolutely do that. Let's see. So to sort of wrap things up for accessions, I wanted to talk just briefly about how you can get accession data in and out of the system. So let's talk about getting accession data in. If you have a lot of accession information, you can actually import it into the system by using a specific spreadsheet that is mapped to the accession record fields. So the easiest way, make this slightly bigger again, the easiest way to get that spreadsheet is to go to the gear icon and go to bulk import templates. And the one that you want is this accession CSV. So you can download it directly from your system. We do have a complete training recording for imports and exports generally. So if this is something that you're interested in exploring, I'd recommend that you find and review that video. But this is what one of those spreadsheets look like. Make it slightly bigger. Excuse me. I only put 2 rows of data in this because I didn't want the import job to run too long or tax the system too much. But I kind of just want to show you that what's possible. And you'll start an import by running what we call a background job. There are a lot of different ways to start that. I'm going to go to the gear icon and go to background jobs. And then I'm going to go to create job and import data. You'll want to make sure that the import type matches what you want to do. So I want to import an accession CSV. And then I'm going to click this green button to find my file. So this is the one I want. And I'm going to select Start Job, which will hopefully be a relatively quick one since there's only a few records. As it's running, you can see the log going, telling you what's happening. So all these things that have been created based on the data in the spreadsheet. And if your job is successful, you will get a green message. So I'm going to refresh the page, and you can see that it has created new records based on the data in your spreadsheets. I'm actually just going to go to one of these. So here we have a new accession record that was created via our spreadsheet. So again, this is something you might want to look into if you have a lot of accession data and you want to get it into your system without manually creating them one by one. As for getting accession data out of the system, there isn't a proper export of an accession record, as they tend to be internal records. But there are some ways that you can get creative if you do want to expose or share your accession data, or if you want to get them out for another purpose. So sort of record by record, you can use the public user interface and set your accession record to publish. That just allows them to be viewable. You could always print the web page of an accession record, but again, that's a single record only. If you go to browse accessions, and now we have a few more after our import job, you can see in the menu bar there's this download CSV button. You can do that, and that'll give you a spreadsheet that has some of the information from all of your accession records, but not all of it. But that is one way to get some of that information. You can use the reports functionality, and that includes both default reports and custom reports. And you can also use the API if you want to do something beyond what's available to you in the built-in functionality. So that kind of brings us sort of to the end of accessioning. I did just want to mention really briefly, I mentioned at the top that there's no descriptive standard about ArchivesSpace, or about what exactly should be in an accession record and maybe what you should do. There is a group developing best practices for accessioning, and potentially that might lead into ways to think about how you create accession records in a particular system. So I'm going to put the link to the group working on that. The website is very minimal right now, but we are looking at sharing out information in 2024. So if that's something that's of interest to you and you're sort of looking for more, I guess, like best practices about accessioning or accession records, that is something that you should look for. So yeah, I think we're kind of through with the accession section right now. So and we're going to save Q&A until the end, I believe. Yes. So let's take a break. And do we want to come back at 1/4 after the hour?
Works for me.
Okay. I know we're all in different time zones, so let's take a 13-minute break and come back at 1/4 after wherever you are.
I am going to talk at you for quite a while, so I put together a PowerPoint so that you have something to stare at least while I yabber at you. My name's Malaka Kottman, and I work at the University of Kansas. We've had ArchivesSpace. It'll be 10 years next month, though we didn't actually start putting records in our system until January of the following year. And we started with Accession Records. Speaking of Accession Records, I've been part of the training corps for, probably about 8 of those years. And that's pretty much my background. So let's get started. I'm going to be covering assessments. Collection assessment is the systematic, purposeful gathering of information about the physical content, condition, and potential prioritization of archival collections. This assessment is a critical collections management function that provides archivists and senior management with valuable quantitative information about an institution's backlog and the condition of its holdings. The resulting data can provide the statistical evidence needed to identify critical needs, prioritize work, and measure progress. It can also assist managers in making informed decisions about how to most effectively allocate ever-tightening and dwindling resources and provide them with valuable quantitative data to present to donors, trustees, and funders. The specifications for the assessment module were developed by the Archival community in 2013 and 2014, with contributions from Smithsonian, Harvard, NYU, University of Michigan, and others. The specifications were further refined by Tufts University Digital Collections and Archives in 2017, when they funded and managed the development of the module with Hudson Malanglo. The functionality was modeled on the Philadelphia Area Consortium of Special Collections Libraries survey tool, specifically the Archivist Toolkit's implementation of that survey tool. The goals of assessment are to provide information on the content and condition of individual collections, provide an informed view of the overall state of a repository's holdings, potentially discovering or confirming strengths and weaknesses, and generate data which can be used to inform the development of institutional priorities. Conducting an assessment will not eliminate any backlog in your repository, but it will better enable you to quantify, prioritize, and explain a backlog. It will help you focus on areas in which additional descriptive work would be beneficial, and it will not solve your preservation conservation needs or problems, but it will better enable you to quantify, prioritize, and explain your preservation conservation needs. And it will not be without effort, but it can be incorporated with the sessioning and processing on at least a day-forward basis or on a project basis. Over time, completing assessment records will enable the institution to track and report on progress by identifying specific collection needs in an actionable way and identifying systemic needs so they can be addressed en masse. Conducting a survey of the entirety of a repository's holdings may appear to be an overwhelming and/or endless prospect, so much so that it might dissuade a repository from attempting to conduct assessments at all. It is important to stress that repository assessments are not an all-or-nothing prospect. It is entirely reasonable to assess portions of a repository or collection holdings depending on the repository's needs. For example, a repository could choose to assess all the collections that arrived prior to a given year, presuming that the older materials might have greater physical conservation needs. Alternatively, one could survey material that arrived after a given year to, say, evaluate the volume and needs of digital content. A survey could be conducted on materials being proposed for a grant project or of the holdings associated with a certain collecting area. Over time, particularly if one is consistent in filling out assessments, these smaller scale projects will aggregate and can provide a picture of the repository as a whole. In short, as with all other things in archival work, if you feel that assessments can help you in any way, do not let the fear of imperfection prevent you from taking any steps at all. One of the fundamental goals of assessments is to generate a data set on which actions can be based and evaluations can be made. The data can be used to show both how far you've come and what work you still have to do. It is important to call out both of these perspectives, particularly with administrators who may not be current on the challenges of working with voluminous archival holdings. For example, you've made numerous acquisitions and provided intellectual access to them, but discovered that the number of AV materials requiring reformatting has expanded more rapidly than growth projections had anticipated. So you need to ask for an increase to an AV reformatting budget line. In another case, you might decide to temporarily refocus departmental priorities based on the results of an assessment to bring description of a particular collecting area up to par. You can point out what good shape everything else is in while getting permission to fix the area lagging behind. In presenting assessment or any other form of data, it is important to give thought to how to use the data to make your case. As a real-world example, Tufts Digital Collections and Archives completed an assessment of their collections and published a blog post describing what they learned in the process and how they are using the results to inform their work. Best practice considerations, policy. Before initiating an assessment initiative or standing practice, determine the baseline depth of assessment you will conduct and when or if institutionally you will make exceptions. Since assessments can be conducted for all descriptive material types, each institution will need to make the following decisions, keeping in mind that consistency is essential in order to achieve meaningful outcomes and that staff time is limited. Will you conduct assessments for accessions, resources, descriptive levels within resources, for example, series and subseries, or all of the above? Will you conduct assessments for digital objects? Under what circumstances, if any, will you conduct assessments for items? Will you edit and update existing assessments or create new ones as conservation preservation work is performed? For example, an assessment might be created and associated with an accession record on receipt of a collection. Several years later, that accession may be processed and described in a resource. Will you create a new assessment record and associate it with the resource? Will you go back to the accession assessment and update it? Will you associate a second assessment with that accession containing more current information? Will you associate the same assessment record with both the accession and the resource? These are all reasonable options based on any given repository's documentation needs, but repositories will need to make choices and, importantly, document their decision-making. Best practices for process. Plan the assessment process and document the actions taken. Ensure there is some kind of descriptive record to hang the assessments on. Develop a process for updating records later. The post-assessment data review. Report out and use the data. Know your audience. Some parts of your reporting line may prefer statistics. Others may prefer visual charts. Present your data in a manner that supports the case you need to make. Be sure to call out successes as well as problem areas. And here are the obligatory cat pictures. And now we'll move on to the actual demo of assessments. To use assessments, unless of course you're a manager of the system administrator, you're going to need to go into the permissions and actually give people permissions to use it. So the permissions are under the gear menu, and then you could go to manage groups. And so, for example, we could go to the advanced data entry users group and click on edit. And it's down here at the bottom. You have three permissions for assessments: create, update assessment records, delete assessment records, or create, update, delete repository assessment attributes definitions. So all staff who will be expected to create assessment records will need the ability to create. Some repositories prefer to limit the ability to delete, and others do not, so that will be your own preference. It is recommended that the creation, updating, and deletion of assessment attribute definitions be limited to a select few to ensure the maintenance of the agreed upon standards and definitions. So, moving on from there to actually create an assessment record. Assessments records may be associated with all forms of descriptive records in ArchivesSpace, specifically accessions, resources, resource components, and digital objects. The relationship between assessment records and descriptive records is many to many. That is, an assessment record can be associated with multiple descriptive records, and a descriptive record can be associated with multiple different assessment records. Like most records in ArchivesSpace, there are several different ways to create an assessment record. One way is to click on Create and then choose Assessment. An assessment record has only 3 required fields which must be completed in order to save the record. These, of course, are indicated by the red asterisks next to them. The records is a link to a resource record, accession record, digital object, or resource component record. The other field is they're surveyed by. This has to be a username for somebody who's actually in the system. So you can't just say, oh, my mom. If she's not in ArchivesSpace, then she can't be a surveyor. And then the survey begin date. It automatically populates today's date, but you're more than welcome to go and change it. Let's see. I will fill this out. So if I want to add a record, there's always the type ahead. So we could do box and choose one of these, or you could click on this down arrow and you get a browse and you could select something. So let's see, what do we want to select? Let's select this one, the box of vintage gay zines and queer elders project. And then down here in this corner, you would click on link. The surveyed by, again, you could type ahead and you could put basic user, or you could click here and click on browse and choose a person, any old person, and then click on link. And then the survey begin date, we'll leave that as today. And so now that the 3 fields are filled out, I could actually save the assessment. So you'll notice that the title is assessment number 5. So they'll all start with assessment, and then this is the, they'll just add a number. So the next one will be number 6, 7, etc. And that also kind of corresponds, if you check the address bar, to the assessment ID that's up here in the assessment bar. So let's talk about the additional fields that you could fill out. Each assessment record is structured into 4 sections: the basic information section, the assessment information section, a list of materials and types and formats, and conservation issues, plus the external documents that they like to put on everything in ArchivesSpace. So the basic information section identifies the context records associated with the assessment and documents, the descriptive state of the materials being assessed, information about the survey itself, whether or not special reviews are required, and information about the scope of the assessment and whether or not the assessment is active or inactive. So here in the existing description, you would go, oh, it came with an accession report. It came with a box and container list. It already has a deed of gift. And then there's several different types of finding aids that it may already have, or it may have nothing. This is all optional. You don't have to fill this out. You could also add notes if you want in the existing description section. It is possible to select multiple options here, which I did. It's also possible to leave it blank. Let's go down some. If the survey was completed, you could add that date information here. Just like in the collection management section of the the resource record, or the I'm not going to say it because there are too many A's, assessment sessions record, you could keep track of the time it took to complete the survey for your own records. You could make a note of the extent that was surveyed if you would like. Let's type in 35 linear feet. You could indicate whether a review is required by somebody else. For example, conservation, you want somebody official in conservation to go ahead and review it. So you would put a check mark here. You would figure out who you wanted to review it and select them. If you don't want, you could also actually have more than one person review it. So I could do project manager and basic if I wanted to. Both of them are there. I'm going to take both of those out and get rid of the review required. If you needed a note, it would go here. The purpose of the assessment, that could either apply to why you want it reviewed, though why you wouldn't put that in the review note, I don't know, or to why the whole collection was assessed to begin with. Scope of the assessment, so let's say it's on a resource record, but all you're assessing is the AV material in that particular collection, so you would put that information in the scope. Sensitive materials here is, it identifies the presence of confidential material within the collection. The descriptive record itself is the most appropriate place for a more detailed comment on the precise nature and duration of any confidentiality. The inactive checkbox indicates if the assessment record is no longer considered active and thus should not be included in searches or reports. This is useful if a set of materials has been assessed on multiple occasions over a period of years, and only the most recent assessment should be considered actionable or incorporated into a needs assessment. On a related note, if material needs to be reassessed, there is no ability to duplicate or spawn a new assessment record and edit it. Any new assessment must be created from scratch, and all the data must be re-entered, even if the changes are only minor. So now on to the assessment information section. You got here a note field, and then you have ratings of null, which is the no rating, to 1 to 5, and the ability to add a note. These 7 categories are not editable, and additional rating values cannot be added. An additional 10 rating categories may be defined and added by an administrator using the Manage Assessment Attributes function, which I'll cover later, and that they'll show up down here. The 7 categories are intended to allow the archivist to attempt to quantify the often subjective considerations on which prioritization decisions are based. One could create a custom report to provide a total score for each assessment, or to rank collections with, for example, a high intellectual value and low housing quality. Optional notes provide the ability to enter a rationale for the rating. A value of 1 is always the most negative rating, and the rating of 5 is always the most positive rating. The interpretation of the ratings can be seen by hovering over the question mark, which will display rollover text for each category. So for example, for documentation quality, a 1 is slight and a 5 is very rich. For intellectual access, you'd have to scroll up, obviously. You got a lot more information. Then let's see. The definition fields in the rollover tips is configurable by repository to accommodate local practice. Instructions for doing this are available on GitHub. It's the same as if you were in a resource record and you clicked on that help arrow and you wanted it to be more specific for your repository. So if you know how to do that, you'll be able to figure out how to do this. Descriptive notes may be added to each category by selecting Add Note. So I'm going to click on Add Note here. Type a note of donor will be featured in a blog post in early 2024. So you don't have to click on save or anything. That note is now there. Notes can be removed by clicking on remove note. To fill out the form, simply click. This you could cut and paste in here, but be careful that you don't add non-UTF-8 characters, which, are those dash things that nobody likes. They always cause problems. List of materials section. I'm going to come back to this additional rating section after I show you how to add them. So the list of materials section allows the archivist to declare the types of formats and materials found in the material being assessed. It also allows for an explanation of any special formats and potential exhibition value, as well as providing fields in which a monetary value can be declared and explained. The predefined checkbox options cannot be edited or deleted, but an additional 20 formats may be defined by an administrator using the Manage Assessment Attributes function. The content in the notes field can be edited and deleted or just left blank, although the presence of the fields themselves cannot be edited or deleted. To fill out the form, simply click on any needed checkbox to toggle it on and click again to toggle it off. So on, off. You may type or copy and paste text into the note fields, though again, be sure that all special characters are in UTF-8 format. The monetary value field is intended to enable the archives to record the appraised or estimated market value of the assessed materials. It could also document the purchase price. The field expects a numerical value with no more than 2 decimal places. The note fields can be used to explain the valuation. So, I don't know, let's say this thing has audio materials, obviously video materials, computer storage units, and scrapbooks. Ta-da! So we will move down to conservation issues. The conservation issues section allows the archivist to declare known conservation issues pertaining to each set of materials being assessed. Currently, there is no way to designate the percentage of the collection to which the issue applies. For example, 100% of the collection needs to have fasteners removed, or 10% of the collection shows signs of water damage. The predefined checkbook options cannot be edited or deleted, but an additional 20 conservation issues may be defined by an administrator using the Manage Assessment Attributes function. To fill out the form, simply click on any needed checkbox. We'll say there's tape. And then there's a conservation note field that you could type in or copy and paste as long as you're using UTF-8 characters. And then, of course, there's the infamous external documents field that you could add if you want. It looks the same as it does on all the other records. And you could remove if you want. Let's do some ratings just because we can. 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2. There. Okay. So now we could save the assessment. Now let's go and I'll show you another way to create an assessment record. So let's go to browse. and we'll do a resource. And let's select the oh, what looks good? The Eleanor collection looks good. You could do this in either view mode or edit mode. It doesn't really matter. We're going to go ahead and open it up in view mode. In view mode, you could determine if there is an existing assessment record by using the left navigation. You click on assessments and it says no records found. So there isn't an assessment record for this one. Yay! So we will go ahead and add one. So you'll click on more, and then you could click on create assessment. And because I was in the record when I clicked on create assessment, the records in field is already filled out. Yay! So I don't have to do it. Just like you could have it surveyed by multiple people, if I wanted to add another record here, I could. So let's do, I don't know. We wanted to do the Native American films accession record. I could add that also, and I could keep adding records individually as desired. So let's do surveyed by manager. And let's go ahead and change the date. We will do August 8th. That sounds good. And we'll just save this assessment. Ta-da! And now it's assessment number 6. So you can see a list of all the assessment records for a repository by clicking on Browse and then Assessments. The resulting browse list has a number of filter options and can be sorted by the date the survey was completed and the survey ID number. So it's already in survey ID number order, but if I wanted to, I could change it to created, ascending or descending, modified, assessment completed dates here. So that's one way to resort these things. I already showed you that you could go to a particular record. Let's go to one that actually has an assessment record. You click on view, click on assessments. Oh, there isn't one. Huh. Let's do assessments. Oh, browse assessments. And so yeah, oh, is the resource record. Okay. So we'll do browse resources, and Krispy Kreme is somewhere around here. We will do a filter this way, KRISPY. And then you click on view, assessments, and here it actually has the assessment record, which you could view or edit from down here also. You can transfer an assessment record if desired. Let's go browse assessments. Oh, let's do this one. Nope, we need to go to the actual here. So you can transfer. So if I transferred this record here, transfer and tell you where it goes, institutions with more than one repository may occasionally need to transfer records between repositories. If a record is transferred to a new repository and it has an associated assessment, and it is the only record linked to that assessment, the assessment happily moves to the new repository only with the transferred record. Please note that in order for all the information to transfer completely, the new repository must contain the same customized assessment attributes that the original repository did. If an assessment is attached to multiple records and only one of the associated records is transferred to a new repository, the assessment is duplicated and exists in both repositories. So what that means is if you have notes that talk about both, then it's going to be kind of confusing since the one thing won't be, one of the items won't be in your new repository. So you may have to go in and edit your assessment record to be, to whittle down some of that information. To delete an entire assessment record, you could click on Browse, you could click on Assessments, you could add a check mark, and you could click on the Delete button here, or you could click on View or Edit mode, because the Delete button is available in both if you have, obviously, those permissions. And then you would click on this Delete button here. Let's go and manage our assessment attributes so we could add more stuff. So to do that, you're going to click on the gear menu and you're going to select Manage Assessment Attributes. So within the Manage Assessment Attributes, it is possible to add up to 10 additional ratings with associated notes, 20 additional material types, and 20 additional conservation issues. It is not possible to add additional independent notes, however. Assessment attribute definitions are repository specific within an ArchivesSpace installation. Attributes should be added thoughtfully and used consistently, since the data will become a permanent part of your assessment record. Once an attribute has been added and used, you cannot remove that attribute unless you remove all of its data values from all assessment records. To create a new assessment attribute, go to the desired section of the assessment attributes and select the green plus button, and then enter the desired value in the resulting empty field. So let's go down here to material types, and I want to add cereals, for example, as a type. As you can see, I was practicing and I already did that. You could also add more, so you would click on the green button again. And then if you don't want to use that type or need that extra line, you would just click on the red X over here and it goes away. Whenever you're done, conservation issues, ruined beyond repair. You would click on Save Assessment Attributes, which just like all ArchivesSpace records, the save is in multiple spots. You have it over here, down here, and of course, there isn't one at the top, so we'll just do that. And the attributes have been saved. So now let's go look at an existing assessment by doing Browse, Assessments, and we will look at the Krispy Kreme assessment in edit mode and go down here. And now we have cereals has been added and ruined beyond repair has been added. Let's see. If the user has permission to edit attribute values, the Manage the Additional Conservation Issues for this repository link will appear and will be active so that you could click on that to get to the area where you would add new ones. But if the user does not have permission to edit attribute values, the link will be grayed out and the text will be replaced with, "Please contact your administrator to add additional issues." You can filter by assessment attributes in the Manage, I'll go back. So here you could filter by values. That's what these magnifying glasses are for. So if I want to say, oh, I want anything that has a physical condition attribute, I click on the magnifying glass and it brings up everything that has that value. And in a new screen, so you could just go ahead and close it and you're back to where you are. If I want to find everything that has scrapbooks, ta-da, it's that one. So that's how you could filter things. Yeah, let's move on to importing. So the assessment module in ArchivesSpace comes packaged with an option to import pre-existing or externally created assessment information. Whatever type of assessment record that you can create in the ArchivesSpace staff interface, you could also import that same information into ArchivesSpace by using its default CSV import process. To download the assessment CSV, you're going to click on the gear and you're going to go to bulk import templates. And the one we want is this one that says assessment CSV, and we're going to click on download. Ta-da! And I'm going to open that for you so you can see what it looks like. Maybe it doesn't want to open. Ah, there it is. It's just slow. So here's what it looks like. Let's go over it. Oh, no. The ArchivesSpace CSV template is different than the other CSV import options. The most important concept about the template structure to understand is that the assessment CSV template groups the assessment information into 4 categories. You'll notice all these say basic up here in that first row. And then you scroll over far enough and you have rating. And then you scroll over far enough, you get format. And then after format is conservation. The first row indicates, well, the first row must contain the headers that match one of those 4 values. With just a few exceptions, those 4 primary categories in the CSV template's first row match up with the 4 sections of the staff interface's assessment record. The second row in the CSV template is dependent on the first row, with specific data attributes being tied to those 4 primary categories. So this one is basic record, so that'd be like the record type. You remember the type of records, they had the finding aids. So this is on the basic section, the finding aid EAD, does it have one? Yes or no? And then the third row in this download is just a sample record. You will not be able to just turn around and import this into your ArchivesSpace instance just to see what it looks like, because these numbers don't correspond to anything probably in your installation, and these, unless you actually have a person named Ginger and Fred, won't link up, so you'll get an error message if you try to import this. But the good news is that the order of the columns does not matter for this CSV import process. The only columns that must be present are the 3 required fields for any ArchivesSpace assessment: the record, surveyed by, and survey begin. So let's get rid of this one. And I will. So additional information about CSV fields can be found in a Google Doc, which is linked from the user manual. So if you're a member of ArchivesSpace, you have access to the ArchivesSpace user manual through the wiki. You would open it up, you would go to the importing assessment records using a CSV template section under managing assessments, scroll down a little bit and click here, and you get this lovely, oh, come on, there it is, Google Doc that gives you a little more information about what should go into each of those fields, what's required, etc. So there's that. We're on page 12. So I mocked up one that I hope will work. And let's take a look at it. So here, resource number 19, you could add more records and types so that you could have one line correspond to 45 different records in your system if you wanted to. So for this one, I did 2. I want this particular line, which is the equivalent of an assessment record, to be added to resource number 19 and to accession record number 9. These are Boolean fields, So yes, no, yes, no. The default is no. So if you delete that line or leave it blank, it will default to N for no. And when it's imported, it will be left as not rated. The basic existing description note, just whatever you want it to be. This is a required field, and it must match exactly the username as formatted in your ArchivesSpace instance. The date, obviously, is a CSV. It really should be year, month, day. But since I'm looking at it in Excel, Excel won't let me display it that way. But the import module understands that and will convert it to how it should be, as long as you format it this way. So if you try to monkey around with it to make it be year, month, day, and it messes up, that might be your problem. So I filled out some lines. Let's go ahead and fill out another one so that we could go through some of these together. So let's do, what I wanted to show you about this record thing. You'll notice all of these are singular words, so there's no S at the end, even though in ArchivesSpace, they don't call it Archival, well, they don't call it digital object number 2, they call it digital objects number 2 with an S. But when you put it in here, it'll be singular. Yes, that's nowhere in the instructions at all. I just figured it out through testing. So let's go down to, well, first let's go open a resource record. Marie, this one. So in that record line, what you're going to want is this number up here, the 23. That's what they want in this line. So RESOURCE. You could do an underscore if you want, but I prefer to do a slash. And what number did I say it was? 23. 23. We're only going to add it to that. I could fill out any of these however I want. N, Y, and leave the rest blank. I could add a note if I want. Note goes here. Who did we want to have surveyed this? We'll do a manager. And the begin date, we'll do 10, 11, 23. It's not over yet. We'll leave the rest of these blank. Did we want to do a rating? Sure, why not? Let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, wait, no, one of these is a note. We don't want to do a rating. We'll just do a 1 because I don't want to have to figure it out. Because this is the reformatting, readiness, the number, and this would be the note. So there you go. Let's scroll some more. We have format. We will say, sure, it has audio. Why not? And conservation. We'll say, sure, it's brittle. Everything's always brittle. And that's how you could fill out that line. And let's click on save. So now we have a filled out bulk load assessment record template. So once you have it ready, you could import the file into ArchivesSpace following the normal import process, which is to go to create, and then you could do bulk import jobs. And then we'll do import data. Very important. I don't know how many times everybody's probably done this. You need to change this. So it'll be assessment CSV. And then you could do add file. Going to click and drag this file here. And then you click on start job. And there's an import error. I knew it was going to happen. Refresh the page. So the import error tells you or tries to tell you what is wrong. It says the basic user number 39 does not exist. So we will go back to our template. And we will change this to manager and this one to manager. Oh, nope. There. And save it. And then go back and re-import it. So create background job, import data. And this is the time that I usually forget to change it because after you've done it 15 times, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot something. Start job. And this one says the project manager doesn't exist. Really? I know it does exist because manage user access. See, it's right there. Wonder if we could use that instead. Seriously, I did do this just the other day, but things change. And save and close. Create report data. Mission assessment. And if this don't work, we'll just assume it did. Ah, I didn't have any more project managers, did I? Oh, I bet I did. Down here. Yeah. All right, one more time. Since we have the time. Ah, that time it worked. And then you refresh the page, and just like all the other import things that you could do, it lists the new and modified records here that you could actually immediately go to. So we'll go to that one. And ta-da, it created a assessment record and linked it to these two dealy bobbers with stuff in it. And it looks really cool. So that is importing. Probably bored you to tears, but there you go. The last thing you could do with assessments is actually get information out, reporting. The ArchivesSpace reports module comes populated with two predefined reports related to assessments. To find the reports, you're going to use the gear dropdown, and then you're going to select reports. The left navigation here will quickly take you down to the reports that are in alphabetical order. The ones we're going to be interested in are the assessment rating report and the assessment record list. So I'm going to click on assessment rating report. Ta-da! The assessment rating report allows you to bring back a report of records based on one or more values of each rating category. The reports were created so you didn't have to choose a date range. However, in practice, it seems to be required in that every time I try it and it doesn't have the dates in there, you get an error. So I recommend always having the dates. Note, this report only provides information from the assessment information section of the records, specifically the general assessment note and the ratings with their associated notes. To run the report, select the desired rating. So first you click on select, and then you're gonna fill out the dates. You have this rating thing, so we could say, oh, I want all the reformatting readiness that were with a value of 3, or it's a drop down. So all of them are here. And as you know, the values were blank, which is not here, or 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5. When selecting ratings, be aware that research value is the one rating that is a computed value. So here is research value. Research value is the sum of 2 other values, specifically interest and documentation quality, which is why it will display values from 0 through 10. None of the other ratings exceed 5. So if we wanted the research value, let's go from here and let's pick, today. The other thing I've noticed is it prefers to just do a few ratings. Like you can't do, show me all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But it seems to work if I do 8, 9, and 10 for the research values. You could choose a format. Your format choices are for your report: JSON, CSV, HTML, PDF, and RTF. The PDF and HTML reports are clearly more static, and the others allow for more formatting, analysis, and repurposing. So of course, I'm going to pick HTML, and I'm going to click on Start Job. So generating report, adding report file. If there was an error, it would be logged here. Once it's done, you click on Refresh Page, and then the Files section shows up, and you could download the report. And I'll open that, and here's your report. So this one, the research value is an 8, and this one, the research value is an 8, and so that's why they showed on this report. Ta-da! Again, that opens in another tab, so we can click on that and get rid of that, and go back here to go to reports again and see the other kind of report. So we want assessment record list. The assessment record list simply lists all the values for all assessment record fields for all assessment records associated with a given repository. Note, it is not possible to limit by the type of descriptive record the assessment is associated with. So you cannot, for example, pull up all the assessment records associated with unprocessed accessions. The only scoping option is to limit to a particular date range. So we will click here. So the date range we'll say is 1999, and then here we'll do today. You could pick JSON, CSV, HTML, PDF, RTF. And so I'm going to do HTML and Start Job. Dun, dun, dun. When it's done, then you click on Refresh and download the report. And this is what it looks like in the HTML format. And so it does, it gives you every single one of your assessments. Let me point out something. You notice I had the start date be January 1st, 1999. However, up here, when it tells you the range that you selected, it tells you 12/31/1999 at obviously midnight. So just be aware that that's going on when you're doing your data. I don't know if anybody works at like midnight, so that there'd be things that were done and you didn't think they'd show up on your report, but there it is. And that's all I have to show you. So we could do questions and answers. I will stop sharing for now. And we'll see what we got.
Malaka, there was a question about the slides that you started with.
Yes.
If this would be available or not.
I could see about getting them put into that folder.
Awesome, thank you. Hillary asks, is there a similar guide to the accession import CSV that explains all the fields, similar to what Malaka did with the assessments? So I'm going to put a few links in the chat and then talk about each of them. So the answer is no, but there is some stuff. So there is a page in the Help Center, the user manual about importing accession data and using that CSV template. It doesn't have a complete, field by field explanation, but it does have a few tips about how best to use it. There is also a recording of a previous training on imports, exports, and reports that actually Malaka and I did. So you could look at that to learn more about importing data. And then the last link, maybe I'll share my screen in order to explain this, but oh, that is my mail. So this is the place in the application where you can download the bulk import templates. And if you notice, some of these, there are two different options. So like this bulk import archival object template, there are two different formats. There's a CSV, and then there's an Excel XLSX format. And when there are two options like this, I'll show you the Excel workbook option typically has some of that explanatory text on the top. Let me make this a little bit bigger. But this is the archival object one. And you can see these sort of top fields do a little bit more explanation of what the field is for and if there's anything particular that you need to know about how to use it. I'm not sure why this option exists for some import templates and not for others, but if that's something that you would really like to see, to have this sort of more better described version of the template, you could potentially submit a feature request to have that created. So I put a link here to the page that explains how people can request new features. Okay, and there's another question about where can linked documents such as accession inventories live? For example, ours are on a OneDrive that only staff can access. So far it has been working, but it seems like that is not sustainable. Is there a best practice for that? I would say the best practice is, to do what makes the most sense for your own local context, which I realize is not an answer. I tend to think of the external document subrecord as like a pointer to another place. And so that place could be something like web accessible, like a Wikipedia article. It could be something network accessible, like somewhere in your shared Google Drive, or some other system that you use to keep information, or it could be like a local location on your computer. But it's mostly just important that you and whoever you're working with, that you have an understanding of like whoever needs to see that information will have access to that place. So yeah, that's sort of what I would say about that. I don't know if you wanted to add anything on that front, Malaka.
No, we use a network drive, and our people just scan in information and put it there, and then the external documents just has a note of where it is on our G drive. And yeah, it's better than the paper files we used to have, but but not much.
Yeah, and I'll also add that, like many other things, this is completely optional, optional functionality. So you don't have to use it, especially if it becomes its own problem. It's really more that if it can be of assistance to you. Katie had asked, where is the most recent link? It looks like maybe you had written that while I was talking about something, but I'm not sure what link you're looking for. Would you be able to respond in the chat or in the Q&A to clarify? Oh, okay, you found it. Great. It looks like we're through the Q&A, but we can give it another minute or two to see if people, if something else occurs to people.
Yeah, not a lot of people that I know are using the assessments module, but like I said in the beginning, Tufts seems to have really glommed onto it and ran with it. So if you have questions, I would recommend putting them on the listserv. I'm sure they would be happy to answer them.
There's a question, will there be other training workshops for ArchivesSpace? And if so, when will they be available?
Ooh, I think this is the last one for this calendar year. But we try to do, is it 2 a year, Rachel?
At least.
At least 2 a
Yeah.
calendar year. And yeah, so we're actually in the process of trying to figure out what we want to do next year. In addition to the basic one, we end up doing the basic one because new people are coming on all the time, or staff leave and come back, sort of thing. So there's the basic one, and then like this one, we kind of did a combo of sessions and assessments. We've done the bulk import, we've done some on authorities. So we just try to figure out what people need at the time and put that together. So there is in your workbook, there's a list, a link to the site where those are announced. So you could stay tuned to that. Good to know. I think Rachel and I did authorities last time too, didn't we?
Yeah, we were really putting in the work. I think this came up in the chat earlier, but I think it's a good thing to resurface. Someone mentioned, I believe, that in earlier versions of ArchivesSpace, the function with the links to bulk templates is not available. Could you share an alternative link to the templates? So I'm just gonna type the answer. There's a link that is also in the chat to the migration tools and data mapping section, which gives you a link to where these templates live on GitHub. So you can always get them that way. The one thing I would maybe highlight about getting your template from GitHub is making sure that the template you use is compatible with the version of ArchivesSpace you're using, because version to version things change. So just be mindful that the template matches your version, and that's one of the reasons that it's so great that now it is in part of the core code and that you can get the template directly from the application, is that you don't have to worry about matching.
Well, it looks like we're winding down with the questions. So I suppose you guys could start sneaking out if you want. Thank you for your time and attendance. Hope you learned a little something.
Yes, thank you so much.